Hello and welcome to Essex by the Sea. I'm Owen Ward, exploring the Essex coast, finding out about all the amazing and interesting stories it has to offer. For this episode, I'm heading for a small island off the coast of a slightly bigger island. Packing Island is situated between Mersea Fleet and Thornfleet, but also at the convergence of the Salcott Channel and Little Ditch, which leads up to the salt marshes near to the Essex Wildlife Trust headquarters, which was featured in episode 53. Bry Mogridge is one of the trustees of the Packing Trust. Thank you ever so much for inviting me along.
You're more than welcome, and nice to see you.
And to get there, we need to get a little boat out, don't we?
We do indeed, yes. You can't miss it, it's an orange boat.
OK, Bry is our captain for the day, and so I suppose we better head off.
Let's go.
OK, if you can cast off, Alan.
Welcome to the packing shed on Packing Marsh Island.
Yes, because I did say before our little boat trip here, Packing Island, but it's not. It's a packing shed on Packing Marsh Island.
Absolutely right.
A lot of people get that wrong, don't they?
They certainly do, even locals.
Oh, well, I'm glad I'm not the only one. And here we are. We've walked up a little shingle beach here. There's another little white boat going out to sea. And I'm looking here. We're joined by lots of birds. There's lots of gulls here on the island. Very stony. There's some shells as well. I'm looking out across the estuary of the River Blackwater with Bradwell former nuclear power station over on the horizon and looking round. I mean, it's spectacular views here. You can hear the birds in the background. And there's a few steps up to the door because this is the shed, a wooden painted black. And Alan, you've got the key to the door. Shall we go in?
Yep, can indeed. That's the original key from the 1890s. There you go.
And in we go then, this long, quite narrow shed, wooden structure, black and white timbers with a very low roof over our head with sort of a loft area. So Alan, how many people would have worked here at its heyday then at the packing shed?
Up to 100, including those who were working on the shells and those who were going out and getting the shells, dredging them up from the seabed.
That's quite a lot in a relatively small building here on the island. What essentially were they doing then? What was happening here in this particular structure?
Sure. They would bring the shells ashore and having put them into pits for 48 hours to clean them out, make them easier for us to eat.
These are oysters, aren't
Absolutely right, yes, of course. They would then bring them in here, and the old men who'd retired from sailing out to sea would scrape all the seaweed off the sides of the oysters. And the new young men who were learning the trade as well, they'd learn. Then they sort them to size, small, medium and large, put them into boxes or sacks and take them down to London by Thames barge from here.
And there's a bit of Thames barge actually just here in the shed. What's this?
It's a rudder.
And where was that salvaged from?
Just about 50 metres to the south of where we are now, towards Bradwell, that way.
And actually you can still see remains actually of some old boats along the foreshore, can't you? Here?
Actually, under the jetty there are 2 old Thames barges as well.
Wow. And it would take quite a while to get to London then, but that changed over the years.
24 hours by Thames barge, and then by train in the 1900s, 8 hours. And today, 2 hours.
Wow. Your oysters would be much fresher today in London than they would be back then, even though that was the quickest way, of course.
Yeah.
They're packing, they're salting here in the shed. What sort of time period was this? Because this was quite a long while ago, wasn't it?
1890 the shed was built. This is the second one on the site, the first one 1880. And that blew away in a big storm. They built this second one here in 1890, and they used it all the way through right till the 60s.
Obviously, over that time, a lot of work has been done on the building because it is a remote location. It is a wood and timber. I guess the weather and conditions are not too favourable for a building such as this.
We have to raise £3,000 a year, because we're a charity, just to maintain it and to celebrate Mersea and Colchester's oystering heritage. We love doing it.
Absolutely, and there's pictures here in the shed. If we walk a bit further in, we've got brilliant displays along the walls here. I've noticed there's nothing below sort of waist height. Why is that?
Because the tide comes in the shed. It can come up to about 8 inches inside the shed. It can come. There's nothing valuable on the floor.
I can see, and we've got suitable footwear on just in case. But the high tide today is still a few hours off, so we're good and high and dry today. But the pictures here on the wall that you've got that show sort of the history of the packing shed, it was in quite a condition when work was done to restore it and bring it back to the condition we see it today, wasn't it? What was it like?
It was just a shell, basically. The roof was old corrugated iron, and it had gone, completely rusted. The cladding had completely gone, just a few timbers. The floor's original, and the table they worked on is original, but everything else was rotting away. So we reclad it. When I say we actually raised the money for it in 1990, and then we didn't know how to do it. So we challenged the Royal Engineers in Colchester, and they said, do you know what, we'll take that challenge, and they did it for us. Isn't that brilliant?
That is fantastic. How long did it take them to do?
It didn't take too long, about a couple of weeks.
That is impressive, isn't it? And all that money, or a lot of that money, was raised by locals here on the island.
Yep,
why did locals feel so passionate about keeping this building?
Because Mersea's famous for its oysters. I've actually seen Mersea oysters in Rotterdam and in Paris. They are well renowned, like Whitstable oysters are too, although Whitstable's not a favourite name in this part of the world. But certainly, you know what I mean. We wanted to celebrate the heritage of the oystering industry, and people in the island love the oysters, and they love what we got here. And we decided to save it, to preserve that heritage for the future generations to know all about it. And they raised it by having parties and dances and you name it. And we raised it. It took a year to do it, to raise the 30,000, and then we challenged the Royal Engineers. Yes, and it worked.
Very much so, and it's in very good condition today. Clearly well loved by members of the trust, and people can actually come and visit, can't they, on special days?
Yes, we have open days. We have one every month from May right through till September. That's 5 months: May, June, July, August, September.
And people can come out, small amount of money to book a ticket, maybe?
Yeah, it's a donation. You don't even book it. You just turn up on the jetty near the yacht club, and you get on the end of the jetty. We call it the hammerhead because it's a hammer shape. And there's a little orange boat. There's two of them running to and from the hammerhead right out to the island, to Packing Marsh Island. We're all licensed. We have to be by the City Council in Colchester. And we have life jackets we'll offer everybody if they would like to wear one. It's up to them.
And the island itself, it's quite a narrow, long island, isn't it? And you heard as we got off the boat the shells and the mud and the stones that are sort of form this island. But that was all at risk, wasn't it? Because of erosion, essentially.
Certainly was, yes. We had to raise money to buy some new stones it had to be from the local area. It couldn't be from somewhere else because you had different bugs than the water in different parts of England or Britain. And what we did was we went to Harwich Harbour, where they're dredging it out for a new harbour extension, and we bought the stones from them and dumped them on here.
Which has extended the island to the south of the island, because actually all of the island was ending up in the harbour at Mersea, wasn't it?
Silting it up.
Not ideal.
Well, we'd have lost our industry, wouldn't we, basically?
Not only would the island have gone, but the harbour would have been silted up too, so people wouldn't have been able to get in and out.
No yachts coming in, no fishing boats, because we've got quite a fishing fleet as well, and it's the biggest fishing fleet between Brixham and Lowestoft.
I didn't know that. So the island essentially was extended further to the south. There's a big mound of essentially newer gravel and stones and sand that's been put there. And that will stop the erosion to a degree, won't it? Yes. Protect the original island that the shed is situated on.
It's the second time it's been done, actually.
And on the island, other than the birds that you can hear in the background probably, there are little pits and pools. Yes. A bit harder to see today, but in the heyday of working here and packing the oysters up ready to be shipped to London, they were very important, wasn't it, because of the washing cycle?
Yeah, I'll tell you why. Because oysters live in the bottom of the sea, and there's bacteria and all sorts of nasties at the bottom of the sea. And if we eat an oyster with that stuff inside it, we'd be pretty unwell. So by putting them into the pits for 48 hours, the tide covers the island twice a day, new seawater goes through the inside of the oyster, washes all the gunge out, and we can eat them safely. Today, they put them under running cold water from a tap, under UV, the blue lights you can see sometimes.
Probably a little bit speedier.
Yes, 42 hours, not 48.
Now, back here in the shed, you've got a little display of various items here. Talk us through these. What have we got here? Let's go over towards them.
We have a weighing machine there, an old 1880s weighing machine. It was totally rusted away. We've cleaned it all up again. And that little basket there is called a tendel for carrying the oysters in. It's unique to Mersea Island, nowhere else. It's made from elm. There aren't that many elms these days, are there?
I mean, it looks to me, I would have said that was a wicker basket, but it's actually made out of elm, as you say. It's quite shallow, isn't it? And
yes.
And that is...
just to carry the oysters around in. We've got little shoes down here.
No, these aren't shoes that you'd normally see in a shop, are they?
They're like an Eskimo would wear on his feet in the snow, not to sink in the snow.
Essentially a square bit of wood with some rope.
And you tie it on your boots and you walk on the mud and you don't sink in the mud, because the mud can be up to your knees. That's a fossil oyster. It's 160 million years old, we've been told by experts. Here we got some knives, which would be used to opening and cleaning the shells if necessary. At the top we got some old 19th century bottles, because people would bring their bottles out here to drink a bottle of beer or even lemonade or whatever. They're quite unique to the island. And here we have a dredge. It's a triangular metal dredge about 6 feet tall, and at the bottom of it there's a net, a weighted net. You drag it along the sea bottom to pick up all the oysters. If it was not weighted, it would just float up. And it brings the oysters ashore, and then anything you pick up in it you don't want, just chuck back in again. And if the oyster is too small, you throw that back in to grow again. Because an oyster can take 3 or 4 years to get to maturity.
What or who would be pulling that net then? I mean, would that be off the back of a small boat, or
off the side of a
human
we
power?
call them the side of a oyster smack? We call them. That's the local oystering boats. There are quite a few around the island.
And these are presumably quite flat-bottomed ones,
They
because
are, yes,
what
yeah.
I've noticed, we didn't just come in a straight line out to the island. We had to meander around. I'm guessing that's because under the water there are lots of sandbanks and
There are indeed,
mud
yeah.
flats.
And we've all gone aground occasionally.
Fascinating to see these objects, all part of the history of oyster fishing, dredging, and being able to supply the markets in London. There's some big old boots there I can see. That's thick leather on those.
The wooden ones, by the way, are called splashers.
Yes, because you would splash around quite a bit, I guess.
And these are old like wellies, but they're made of leather. Good old fisherman's boots there.
How heavy can oysters be? I mean, the people who were packing the crates and the bags, the sacks that would take them up to London, how heavy would the bags have been?
Oh, the bags would have been quite a weight, yeah. Or a bag or a box would be at least 50 pounds to carry. You have to be pretty strong to do it.
Yeah. Quite a weight, really, then. And there's what looks like a garden fork, but it's got a lot more prongs than your average garden fork these days.
It's called an evel. It was used to pick up the oysters which were stuck in the mud and pick them up easier. So the tines, the pointy bits, are quite close together, so you don't miss any oysters.
But there's lots of them. It's quite a wide, almost like a shovel, but
just points like
but
a fork.
not quite. Well, brilliant to see these items here. All original, all local as well, because these would have been manufactured and made locally here,
They
wouldn't
were indeed, yeah.
Well, brilliant that these items are then on display here in the packing shed. Nowadays, though, I mean, how is the oyster industry? Episode 1 of Essex by the Sea was with the University of Essex, who at the time were doing some studies with native oysters, particularly in this part of Essex. But how is the industry today?
It's surviving. It goes through its phases, and it has had difficult times with diseases. Like you and I can catch, for example, a flu or even COVID in the air just by breathing the air in, or a cold, can't we? Oysters can catch a disease in the sea or a virus in the sea. And back in the 1960s, 62, they caught a virus. It was so bad, by the end of September 62, they had lost 80% of their oysters.
Wow.
That bad. And then came the night of December 31st, 62, 1st of January 63, 12 feet of snow all over England. and it froze the sea as well, would you believe? And you could walk across from Mersea to Tollesbury across the sea. And the last 20% were frozen to death. Nothing was left. So what they did was they went to the scientists in the ministry in London and said, can you help us? And they said, OK, we'll get our scientists on it, come back in January and we'll tell you the answer. And the answer was this. The virus is gone. They're all dead now because they were frozen to death, the last few. There's nothing left, but we can give you some baby oysters from down at Falmouth in Devon. The same creature, bring it up here, put it in your waters, they would grow. You have a harvest within about 4 years, and it worked. But secondly, we only have our oysters for 8 months of the year. The months of May, June, July and August, no letter R in it. You don't eat them. You can, but they're having babies. Spatting, we call it. And why waste the babies? So we have a moratorium in the summer months, which is when the tourists are here, unfortunately. So what they did was they also got some other oysters called rock oysters, or gigas, the Latin name, and they brought them up from Portugal at the end of 1963 and put them in the water. They're now everywhere. We've got both in Mersea, the natives, Mersea natives or Colchester natives, and the Portuguese gigas or rock oysters. They're bigger and it tastes similar, but they're a bit more chewy, I find. I prefer the natives, being a local boy now.
Do they naturally compete for the
space?
Breeding grounds and the space?
A little bit, but they don't mind because they're still going to dredge them all up anyway. But I will tell you, they weren't from Portugal originally. They were brought from the Pacific Ocean in the 1660s.
Wow. To
Portugal. They're all over Europe now, all over Britain, and then we got two sorts, and you can eat them all year round. What a bonus.
So, you've mentioned that the Packing Shed Trust is a charity dedicated to preserving this shed and the stories and the way of life that it would have been back then, but also how important that the oyster industry has been to Mersea and the surrounding villages, isn't it?
Of those 100 people who would have been working in the industry on the boats or in here scraping the shells back, etc., you would have had all their dependents, their wives and children too. You're talking about not just 100 people, but up to 300 or 400 people dependent upon the oystering industry at one time in those days. Not now.
Now, there's been a bit of drama as well, hasn't there, Alan, here at the Packing Shed, or certainly involving the people who used to work here. Tell me more about that.
Absolutely, yes. Back in the 1870s, the Mersea men working on the island here saw out in the harbour, over by Bradwell, they saw the Burnham on Crouch oystermen out there nicking all our oysters, so they weren't very happy. They went over and they got the oysters back from the Burnham boats, and they captured the Burnham boats and brought the Burnham men ashore. And then at the end of the day, they gave the Burnham men their boats back with no oysters. Off they went, the Burnham men back home again, unhappy. They went to the police, and that was reported as piracy on the high seas, the only case ever in England of piracy on the high seas on inshore waters.
And it was here on the Essex coast.
Yes, exactly right. And it was taken to the High Court in London. We had to engage with the oystermen, engage very expensive lawyers, and also every single MP locally stood up in their favour as well, and it was thrown out, and they won the case. But they had to spend lots of money on lawyers.
So the Mersea oystermen won out in the day.
Indeed. Sorry about that, Burnham.
And there's a story relating to World War I as
there
well,
is,
because that actually still has an impact on the island today.
Yes. In the First World War, we lost so many men, didn't we, sadly, in the trenches, and all their rifles too got lost in the mud. We had no rifles to give to the new young men joining the army in 1916, by that time anyway. And so they went to the Americans and said, can we buy some rifles from you? You're neutral, but we'll buy them off you. And they were brought across the Atlantic to the nearest port to an army barracks town. We have Colchester Barracks up the road. And so 3 ships dropped anchor in the harbour outside here, and they ferried the rifles ashore to Mersea. Job done. Before they sailed back, the captain said we better do something about the things under our ships. They're called American slipper limpets. They grow underneath the ship, and they're only about an inch long and about an inch high, and they're quite sharp, and they grow in colonies about 8 inches to a foot long, and hundreds of these things under the ship. Slows the ship right down. Best thing to do, they said, was to get rid of them. So they got the ship's company, they dragged a chain, keel-hauled it actually, under the ship, pulled all the the slipper limpets off. They fell into the harbour out there, and they grew all over the harbour, where the oysters were. And then when our men came back after the First World War in 1919, they went out oystering again, dredging the harbour. They picked up oysters, but also hundreds and hundreds of American slipper limpets. They brought them all ashore and dumped them on the island here. There's thousands of them all over the shore here. And they're still there, and we dredge them up and chuck them away again.
Still here all that time, over 100 years ago after the First World War. Fascinating story. Well, Alan, thank you so much for showing me around the
You're more than
packing shed
welcome.
here on Packing Marsh Island.
Got it right, yes.
Let's just make sure that is clear. And it's fantastic, the work that the volunteers are doing to keep the heritage and the history alive.
Thank you. We have about 25 volunteers and we love what we do. Thank you for asking us.
Thank you very much for inviting me here today. Now, if you'd like to support Essex by the Sea, please check out my Ko-fi page, where you'll find how you can do just that. The link to the Ko-fi page is in the description of this episode. So until the next one drops, I suppose the only thing now is we've got to get the boat back to Mersea Island. Bry, are we ready to cast off?
Yep, ready when you are.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much.